So I'll break it up into like two sections. So there's like, I kind of like thought of it this way. There's one, last week I did this talk at LA Tech Week, and it was like just called the Founder's Journey. And I know you've done a venture before, right? And then this is like your guys' first one out of Adobe, and then this is like your second one, right? But kind of like first, right?
Yeah. Third, first like venture.
Yeah.
Back. The others were bootstrap.
Yeah. So I guess like the thing that I kind of forget, and maybe this is redundant for you guys, is just kind of like the risk that we're taking, right, as founders, of like what does it actually mean? Because it's almost as if I came up and like announced to everybody, I'm like, I'm gonna go be the next Jay-Z, right? Like that's almost as like absurd as me going out there and being like, I'm gonna go build the next unicorn from a mathematical or statistical perspective. And but then there's not a lot of, I think, like community around the shortcomings or like the mental health wear and tear for founders of what that actually means and going through it. And I've just like gone through these roundtables or interviewing founders or working with founders where I've kind of just heard a lot of it, whether through it's like founder therapy kind of feel, or like just going on these roundtables and just talking to them from all stages, from like seed all the way to like publicly traded. And like, you know, there's some like pretty crazy stories of stuff that they've gone through, things where they are backwards on payroll, things where like they have less than $1,000 left in the bank account, where they're 2 to 3 years in, some where like they had to play weddings and bat mitzvahs just to get their business off the ground, right? For the first few years. And I think like those are just kind of good reminders for other founders to kind of like understand that that's kind of like table stakes for us in terms of what we're trying to do. But not everybody kind of like is privy to that. And I think we always think about the vanity metrics of like how much are we going to raise, or like what are we going to do in an IPO, or like what's our exit strategy, right? It's like when the reality is, you know, the majority of founders I've seen that have actually like gotten to like a unicorn status or like exited in that stage, like it's 10 plus years in, right? And so it's like, are you willing to make the commitment to whatever the 10-year investment is of whatever you're trying to build? The only times I've seen like founders that have exited with a financial success going into as an objective were the ones that like this is like the third or fourth one. And so it's a very different approach. And a lot of times they're leveraging their network to like already have acquisition strategies in place before they actually go out and they build, right? So they, like one dude that I know, like my mentor is like, he built out like a R&D software and sold it to Gusto, and he had gone into like the top, he went to like 5 potential buyers before he built it out 2 years prior. And he's like, if I built this solution and I get the customers and I show traction, will you guys be interested in buying? And 3 out of the 5 said yes, one of them being Gusto, and then literally 2 years later followed on with the execution of that. But I think it's important because like, I know that I've gone through a lot of times personally where it's like I've been broke multiple times. I've ran successful companies where like I've been able to like capitalize on, but then there's all the yo-yos of everything else in between. And like, I think it's so important to understand whatever your personal why is. And I don't know if everybody thinks about that here or everybody thinks about it when they run through this journey of like, what is your personal why? I just came from a lunch where there's a founder, she's raised $50 million, went through a Series A, 6-year-old company, but she's had to pivot the business 2 years ago, and they're just cracking like 2.5 million in ARR. And so like, in all senses, that seems like, I mean, like there's different levels of success and wins in that story, right? Like raised $50 million, got 2.5 million ARR, but like when you pull back, she's like fucking like sweating bullets because her investors are worried. She's got a limited amount of runway still because they're leveraging this Series A from like 6 years ago, right? So they're starting to run out of capital, but they need to get to like 4 to 5 million in ARR as quickly as possible for them to then like get to a healthy place to go fundraise again. And her personal why is like she's just had another kid, and she's like, I want to make sure that I am like doing right by them, and you know, I want to be able to have a story. I don't need to sell this for $1 billion. I've gone through this route before, but I need to give it everything I've got. And I think like it's important to remember those things in the darkest moments when it's like your back is against the wall. Like, what are you going to be recalling? And it's not going to be like, oh, I'm going for that exit. Like unless it's like a scenario where I think, you know, you come from like meager upbringings and like you want to make sure your mom doesn't have to want for naught. Like I've seen that be a good driver, but just something to think about, I think is a good reminder for people. And then I think just, I'm going to run through like actual tangible stuff in a second, but like the things that kind of like talked from all of you guys that kind of thought was people are getting stuck on is like, I think everybody understands the idea of like validating and getting customers before trying to like invest too much time in building stuff, just because you don't want to build something where ultimately the end user or the customer is not going to pay for it, right? I think the trick is like, some of the stumbling blocks I've seen people run into is like, well, how do I actually define and narrow my ICP to a place where it's actually like has a high probability of like buying from me? And then second to that is like, and what does that actually mean? Like, how do you actually delineate between ICP? And then the second part of it is like, how do I actually get in contact to them? And that's the other part that I feel like people are kind of like struggling with. So that's what I'll run through. And then I have a whole other stuff in terms of like going from like an MVP to trying to get to product market fit, which is like scaling up and automating. I don't think anybody probably here should be doing that unless you already have proven customers, like, and you know who your ICP is. There's probably no reason to automate stuff because you're using messaging that probably is not optimal. And so, and if anything, you're like, it's becoming a liability to your email domains, your resources, which is your time and your money, versus like focusing on the outcomes when there's probably other ways to do it more smartly. So, all right. That's the gist of it. I'm gonna blast through these things. Okay, so when we're kind of like talking about like ICP, there's a few variables, and some of this is redundant with what Jake said, right? But I think it's important to note like your TAM, SAM, and SOM, right? TAM is a vanity metric that most of us already know about. Like that's what investors want to see. They want to know you have $1 billion plus market. But when you're going to launch your product, it's your SOM, right? So it's your obtainable market today. I think about timelines. So your SOM is what's obtainable in the next 6 months to 12 months. Your SAM is what's available 12 to 18 months. And then your TAM is like literally like 2 to 3 years out from now. And that'll evolve as your product evolves. So your market will continuously evolve also. That's something to think about in terms of like what you're going to launch with. And then also the other thing that I think about is like your LTV and sales cycles as other variables to think about when you're launching, and how you define your ICPs. So if you're a bootstrap business and you need to get cash as quickly as possible, you're probably going to focus on the shorter sales cycle, right? Something that's going to close in a few weeks or less than a month. And most likely though, smaller LTVs. And that's totally fine. It depends on where you're at. I know companies that have raised like venture capital fund and then like they're running out of runway and that's how they have to operate. They got to get a bunch of these small deals in as quickly as possible for them to extend long enough so they can then switch back to enterprise mode. And then there's the other side of it, which is if you're fundraising and you have enough runway and you need to get those large logos in to kind of like prove it out, then you can focus on the longer sales cycles and higher LTVs. The one caveat to that is just like you don't want to become a glorified dev shop to one big customer. I know like a company, it's called Jiva AI. They've pivoted 3 times, and I know the founder really well. And the first iteration of the product, their biggest customer was Verizon, 80% of their revenue. And what ended up happening was they just ended up building an unscalable product to one company, so they had to pivot. So that's, again, something to think about when you build out your ICPs. This is kind of how I think about it. So you want to be as specific as possible. You can have like fucking 20 like cohorts of like different ICPs. The whole point is to like delineate between each group somehow by, I think of ICP as like the company or the account, right? If you're B2B, if you're direct to consumer or like B2C, then you really focus on the persona. And the persona is, these are all going to be, that's the individual within an organization that's going to be involved in the buying process. And then the type, which is, this is probably, there's a lot of different definitions, but like this is decision maker, champion, influencer, end user, implementer. So if you're doing product led and you're focusing on end users, that might be something you want to focus on versus going after the decision maker out the gate. If you go on like LinkedIn Sales Nav, like these are kind of like the filters that they have. So I kind of just use that as a point of reference because that's probably the easiest resource. If you're on like these other like databases like ZoomInfo or Apollo, they're gonna have like similar filters. I just highlighted the ones that I think at this stage probably just be the most relevant. The more mature companies will get really, really like granular around this, and then they'll even have additional statements like they need to require to fill out before that's considered a qualified buyer. Yeah. Pointing at that, yeah, thank you. Um, cool. And so like this is first just like how you create your ICPs, right? Is there questions around that?
What's the cohorts?
Cohort is like what you so the goal here is at the end of the thing is you want to eliminate as many of these ICPs as possible until you end up with like one or two, and that's who you're going to focus on selling to, right? So because you might think again like the TAM, like I've spoken to people where it's like, yeah, I want to like customer success is my market, right? But it's like, well, really, like, is it mean like the customer success of Microsoft, or is it like customer success at like ABC retail store? Like, what does it actually mean, right? So you want to drill down by the companies and then and then ultimately as we run through the test, you're going to eliminate them based on how those conversations go. This is also depending on who you guys are selling into. I know there's some are selling into enterprise, some are doing like SMB, some are mid-market. So like your channels of like what you're going to use to get in front of them are all going to vary. So enterprise might be email and LinkedIn. If you're focused on SMB, that'll probably be phone in some shape or form. And just remember like whatever data you collect, these are the different possible channels you can leverage it for. And there's probably more than this nowadays, but a phone number gives you like SMS, ringless voicemail, cold call, emails. You can retarget using that. You can do direct emails. Mailing addresses, direct mail, foot traffic. Also, you can literally like walk into places. This is again kind of boils down to the why, right? It's like walking into a physical location if you're trying to like sell to restaurants is a very feasible thing to do. A lot of people don't do it because it's uncomfortable, right? Like, but it's like that's a direct point of contact that you could spend time doing, but people won't do that. And it's like, well, if you're starving or if you're not going to be able to feed yourself until you get that restaurant to pay you something, like all of a sudden you might be a little bit more inclined to do that. So I think it's important, like, because I know that's some real use cases. These are ways to start aggregating and building out your list. And what you want to do is for all those cohorts that you have the different ICPs for, you want to start building out a list for each of those and segmenting out. So it's like a list of 100 of cohort 1, a list of 100 for cohort 2, 3, 4, etc. Right? So then you're going to start doing outreach against each of those cohorts. And then based on outcomes, we're going to start eliminating. I'll show you what those outcomes we're going to look for. But these are different ways to aggregate contacts. Some of this is going to make sense for you guys. Some of it's not. I'll add into this before I send it to you guys, like a matrix of like, I think cost and ease of use, because that seems to be the biggest also barrier for people is like, yeah, well, Zoom info is great, but that's like, I'm not going to spend $10,000 to do that right now. If you are selling enterprise, like that value, like that cost is actually typically okay because you're going to make it up pretty quickly if you convert a customer, but in the very beginning it might be difficult. So these are like paid databases you can use. There's web scrapers. I think JT, who's around here, is like great at web scraping. But like try to just figure out where your target audience is, like lives, sleeps, eat, breathes, either online or offline. And what I mean by offline is you gotta get creative around like where are they. For example, if you're trying to target like stay-at-home moms in affluent communities, I might have them have somebody stand outside of a yoga studio in like an affluent area between the hours 11 to 2 during the weekdays, or like if I'm targeting general contractors, like stand outside of a Home Depot from 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. There's always going to be an online version of that kind of community somewhere, and that you can find that's more scalable. But again, like that's doing uncomfortable things to get in front of your target audience. So you can do web scrapers. There's tools like Phantom Buster, Clay, DataBar. I'll share all these resources. There's public databases. So in your case, like if you're targeting like accountants and stuff like that have to be licensed, there's probably databases around that you at least helps you like start figuring out public databases around licenses, also directories, right? It's gonna be pretty easy to kind of like pull together a bunch of like data around them. It's gonna be again like I might only get phone numbers, but like how are you gonna leverage those phone numbers to actually get that as using that as a primary channel to get your messaging across? But these are different things. Like this is like short-term property rental owners. Like I was helping a SaaS company that's doing that. People who own like Airbnbs and Verbos. And like, look, they're like giving you like email contact, phone numbers, like it's pretty extensive. So there's like 7 points of entry in terms of like channels. Again, I mentioned directories. You can use web scrapers for this. This is great for like SMB. Google Maps is also a good one. conferences and conventions. So obviously sometimes you have to pay for these conferences to get access to the list, but there's also like a lot of like groups. So there's like LinkedIn groups around certain like, or Facebook groups around different conferences. So you can scrape those. So you can always like go into those and like, or even just like ask people like who's going in there and use that as a way to build leads list. There's a lot of way to leverage like LinkedIn and these groups to like build leads lists. Like because you don't know who they are, you just have to post the right messaging in them to attract the right kind of prospects towards that for engagement, and then all of a sudden you start having a leads list. This is an example of that, like finding these different public groups on social media. I think about like this, so you have like when you do ads or SEO on Google, like you're trying to target specific search queries, right? If you're doing paid ads across like LinkedIn or doing DMs, you're specifically targeting an individual within the professional organization. On Facebook ads, it's like looking at people's demographics or interests, right? In these groups, they're all congregating for a similar reason, for like a certain topic, but we don't know if they're actually like qualified or who they are in these communities. So I've leveraged like surveys and market research like exercises to post into these groups to have them fill it out and then like collect qualification data as well as contact data as part of the exercise. And that's worked well as a way to kind of like infiltrate these groups.
Quick question for that.
Yeah.
So in this case, like you can scrape through all the 16,000 members. Like you can pull the URLs for each of them. Like
Yeah. So there's Phantom. So like there's Phantom Buster. There's literally like tools for scraping almost every single thing you can think of. So it's just like going down the rabbit hole. Like you could go down a rabbit hole of like finding all these things. And I'm not a technical person, but there is like, for somebody who's not technical, there's stuff that I can use that I've figured out over the years. And especially now, like there's just, so that's again, like don't let, how do I get that information be the thing that distracts you from like trying to think creatively around where they are. Like, cause if it's online, like somewhere like where they are, there's always a way to find contact data. It may not be like a direct email address, but it might be a social media DM, which, which is funny enough, like on Instagram, like when we were targeting like short-term property rental owners, like that's a great place because all of them are trying to be influencers to rent out their spots, right? So they're very active on these places. And it wouldn't be what you normally think, but like that's another viable channel. Another thing is like if you guys are displacing an actual like role in a company, job boards are awesome, right? It's like a lot of times you can actually find the person who's making the hire for the job, specific job, and you can go and actually message them, like make an argument and be like, hey, you're looking to pay, 47 to 65,000 a year for this role. Our tool does it for 10,000 a year. Like, why are you not doing that? And that's a great way to generate leads lists. And you can filter out on LinkedIn or even Indeed or a lot of like other ones, like you can get pretty narrow around like what specific roles people are looking for, and that if that's like really like what you're displacing, you can make an argument for it and find out who's hiring. This is like a random one, but this is again showing you a little bit of the creativity part of it. It's like I had a bad experience with Postmates where the driver ended up stealing a bottle of tequila that I ordered on through the app, and so I submitted a request support ticket through the app, but nobody gets back to you right away. So I like started like posting on Postmates support on Twitter or X, and all of a sudden I started thinking is like, so these are a bunch of people complaining about shit about Postmates, right? So if I'm Postmates, I would scrape all the Twitter people here and just like go back to, if I'm Uber Eats, I would scrape all this and I would go back to like them and be like, hey, guess what? I know you're complaining about about Postmates, and we are giving you like a $10 credit to use Uber Eats. Like, why wouldn't I do that, right? So that's just kind of like helping you think a little bit more creatively of like how to leverage where your audience might be. And I mentioned this one too, but it's like using surveys as a means to do it. Like I ran one for something that we're doing about understanding why people buy SaaS products, and then we ended up with like 1,300 results. Yeah. So for our when we ran the math around like how much it cost us per qualified lead, it was like pennies on the dollar. These are all the tools, I'll send it to you, but like this is like the different sources, ICPs that you can target, examples, list building tools, data, channels. So don't worry about going into this. And then so we talked about like just how do you build out the audience, then how do you get the channels to get in front of them. Now it's all about the messaging. Like what the hell do I say to actually now get their attention, because it's such a noisy environment. And I think like especially now we're dealing with a lot of like attention scarcity. And so this is how I think about it. And I'll show you guys in a second how I would do this on LinkedIn Sales Navigator. But trust building. So instead of like going out and just like reaching out to 100 people cold, I would look at the list that you've accumulated out of the 100 and try to find, you know, what are the degrees of separation, right? And what do you have to use? And I think I've told you this too, but it's like, where do you work, right? Like, and looking up, did anybody else work at the same companies that you've worked in the past? That's like part of your target ICP. And you can use that as a point of reference. Like I'm an ex-Googler and I saw that you are too. And I'm actually going out and I started, sandboxing this idea. Would you be open to like sharing some thoughts as a way to start a conversation? Much easier than it is to like go to some random person that you have not even, maybe as an ex-Googler, but you're not even making that as a point of reference. And if you're not, you're losing out on the opportunity to like have a significantly higher response rate than it would be just reaching out point blank. And there's a few, this is kind of like the order of like from warmest to coldest that I would think about to leverage from a messaging trust building perspective. Referrals and intros are always the best, right? So getting somebody to directly like CC you on something. Associations or commonalities. So that could be like the undergrad university you went to and where you got your MBA. There's certain ones where like the MBA thing is like a really big, like there's a company I'm working with, it's called like the co-founders met at Booth School of Business, and they have a big community. And so that actually is a great way for them to start generating, like they're getting like 4 or 5 meetings a week just from that association. And then I know another guy that's building out, like he's a CFO building out like a back of office tool targeting CFOs, and like his Anderson School of Business MBA is like really leveraging a lot for that. So those things, places you work, and even going on LinkedIn and looking up like second degree of like connection, and like looking at who you have as a common like intro between two people, whether or not you really know the person or it's just like a acquaintance. It's always great to be like, oh yeah, hey, I noticed we both know Chris. How do you know him? And like blah, 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 right? Just try to use that as a way to drum up a conversation, but a lot easier to drum up a conversation that way than it is to do it cold. So these are like trust building exercises. This is what I would think about when you start building out messaging. The other thing is like focusing on different call to actions. So right now you guys are probably just driving for a meeting. Maybe it's like a feedback meeting. And that'll exhaust itself pretty quickly. But there's other ways. So you could do a product demo, you can do it for market research, you could ask them to be like a podcast guest or join as a panelist or do a webinar or do anything. People love to speak about themselves. So even if you don't have anything formal, like just be like one-on-one in here and just be like, yeah, I'm recording this right now on a Zoom and it's gonna be for a webinar I'm gonna be putting together. But just, if you just switched it to like, I'm recording for a webinar, and I just want to ask you some questions, like you'll be so surprised at like how many people more of a percentage wise will respond to you than anything else. The other one is a product advisory board, which actually probably is relevant to you guys right now. But asking people to be a part of a product advisory board is also something that a lot of senior executives are willing to be a part of. And that's another way to crack through. The last point of like any outreach is objection reasoning. And to me, like this is so important to understand is like, if you're talking to them and they're like, this is not for me, or you're not getting through to them, you want to be able to categorize the objection because that will help you eliminate that as an ICP right now. So they could be the wrong person, wrong ICP. They could be not dealing with the pain point, or the pain point itself is not a big pain. I always like to, whenever I do these kind of discovery calls, I will always make sure I know how to talk about the pain in the way that they explain it. So that's why I'll first ask them is like, hey, I'm looking to solve for this. Like, how does that relate to you? And then have it as an open-ended question for them to give me that anecdotal like feedback around like how to actually use it in a language that they use, right? Because I don't have that domain expertise, so I need to know how they talk about it. So there's certain probably like, language or terminology that might be specific to that. And then I always ask them is like, so how big of a pain is it? Like 5 being like an extreme pain on a scale of 1 to 5. And then if they say 4 or 5, I actually mark that down in a sheet because then I know that they're probably willing to pay something for it. And if it's a 1 or 2, they're probably not going to pay for it.
Are you trying to get this feedback in a response to a cold outreach?
No, I want to do this on a call, or if I'm not getting responses, then I want to use this, and I will do this like in a multiple choice, meaning like I know you're super busy, but let me know like if you don't mind, like what the reason is why you can't get back to me, and choose from one of these. You'll be surprised, like if this is part of like a sequence and this is like your third outreach, a lot of people will actually respond with number 5, which is like I'm actually busy, but follow up later. This is interesting. And that at least like makes you have a definitive understanding. Like, I mean, if you're like you're tracking this in your CRM, like I'll follow up with this guy in 3 months, but it's not a closed lost opportunity, which is just as important to know. And then this is again like things I'm trying to accomplish on a call. So I'll have my cohorts. I want to understand how long the sales cycle would be. So I'll be asking like buying related questions, like what's their purchase process look like? Who needs to be involved in decisions? What the potential LTV of that deal could be, how they explain the pain point, how they scale the pain, what is the pain threshold. This is stuff that I would do later, but like trying to figure out what value can I provide to them to solve for that pain. And then lastly is asking them also for channels. Like where are you going to upskill yourself? Where are you learning to get certifications? What are you doing to like, what I'm saying, like, they can help you identify certain channels if you're not privy to them and help you shortcut some of those things. So it's like asking that on one of these feedback calls can also be really useful for you because it can open up open up windows that you were not thinking about before. And this is like what I'm trying to accomplish. Like if have a list of 100 across each cohort, I'm trying to figure out the number of replies I can get. That includes positive or negatives or fuck yous. If you're not getting an FU, like you're not pushing hard enough. How many positive replies I'm getting, number of meetings I actually did, and then the objections and the objection reasonings. And then also obviously the yeses, like they're interested. And then based on that, if I'm like, any of them that I'm not getting any meetings or no positive, I'm eliminating as quickly as possible. So if I get through 100 of all these, then I would try to figure out what that is so I can get rid of it.
100
It can.
responses or some.
It doesn't have to be responses. It can just be like 100 outreach, right? But you want to make sure that somewhat measurable across, and it doesn't have to be 100. You can start off like small. You can start off like 20, right? Because if like 20 across 10 is like 200 outreaches, right? So that's a lot. But like if you do 20 each, and there's like only, your whole goal here is to get to one positive, because then you can validate, right? If it's all of a sudden all 10 out of the 20 are all like negative or like aren't going anywhere, I would just try, that might be just already enough information to be like, I'm not going to focus on these 10 and then just focus on the other 10 that you got a positive response for. Didn't go any further than that, but like at least you want to start like eliminating for the purpose of optimizing your bandwidth with the limited resources that you have at this point, which is time and money. So what's allowing you to progress forward at each of these stages, that's what you're trying to accomplish.
So on Monday, I forget the name of the person who said it, was Jake.
Jake, yeah.
Yeah, it was that like 1 out of 325 is sort of a good target response rate. The numbers would need to be much bigger, right?
Yeah, that to me is a cold outreach, right? So like cold outreach, 1 out of 325 is probably decent. But if you're using these different degrees of separation, like, I mean, I can get 5 to 10% response rates from those.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was also email.
Yeah, that's email too. That's different than just other channels. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And to me, like really, once you get to a single yes, you're going to have at least some process in place to get to that yes. If you can validate that percentage to hold that percentage, right? So it's like, I only converted 1% into a customer out of 100, right? At least you got one. So the next thing is test, if I do another 100, can I get another one? And if I do 1,000, can I get 10, right? And that's kind of the thing that you're thinking about. And that's also for every single stage. So it's like a single positive, a single customer, like I think about it in those ways, and then just validate. And over time, what you're trying to do in the more scalable versions and the automated versions is you're just trying to let that run at the suboptimal rate, so at least you're generating something always. And then on the manual side, at least somebody internally on the team is always testing to beat that number. So you're always testing the beat. Can I get from 1 to 2%? Can I get from 2 to 3%? And that's optimizing for messaging channels and audience. So you'll always get better at the channels, you'll always get better at the audience, you'll always get better at the messaging. So, yeah. Questions on it?
A question for the previous one.
Yeah,
Let's say you reach out to somebody and they say no.
yeah.
How do you proceed with that for either of the reasons, whether they're busy or they think that because you've come across as salesy, they probably didn't want to sort of engage with you.
Yeah.
But for a fact that they fit your ICP. So do you continue pursuing them? Do you?
I wouldn't. I would just try to. I would just accept it as a lost thing. So those are the stages, right? So like building the trust. So that could be a reflection of not having built the trust, which is fine because like you didn't. Trust would allow you to then share the value, right? That's the number one goal, is to be able to make sure that they understand the value. And then after they understand the value, you want to get to a yes or no as quickly as possible. And the no is okay, but you want to get the objection reasoning. And so what I would try to figure out is like with the no is like, is there a creative way for me to go back and be like, I understand this isn't good for you, but hey, I'm down to buy you a cup of coffee and give you a $5 Starbucks gift card if you just tell me like the reason why it's a no, right? Then people are actually like responsive. And I've actually done that before because that is important data, especially for like somebody that's like super early. Like it would at least force them to like think a little bit and be like, was I quick to say no? And I've actually had people re-engage because now they're like, oh, thanks for being cognizant of my time. That's the other thing is like, think about your perspective is like, have empathy and compassion to what they're dealing with. Whatever you're solving for is at max, like solving for 10% of their day-to-day problems. It's 100% of your effort, but it's only max of theirs. So if you are coming across as somebody that's like, this is curing cancer, they're never gonna say, that's never gonna be that for them, right? And so you need to be conscientious of that. And so like knowing that that's the case, I think a lot of times I try to come at it as like try to be an altruistic problem solver. So if I can help them solve even the outside of the 10%, like the other 90%, make an intro somewhere or whatever it is, come across that way, most of the times 50-50, then they start asking me questions about how I can help. Yeah. I also want to just show real quick like the LinkedIn thing because I think that's helpful for you guys. So if I go to like LinkedIn Sales Nav, there's a lot of things you can do to play around with this. Like if you're investing in anything, I would always say invest in like LinkedIn Sales Nav, especially right now, versus like a lot of these like automating tools or like scale up tools, just because it allows you to do a lot of things here. And because your strongest asset is probably yourself and your background and at this stage, an email doesn't actually give you that, right? Like doesn't have a face associated to it, doesn't give me any understanding around your background or your pedigree and stuff. So I would spend time in here, but like I'm going to like, let's just say I'm trying to target like customer success. And then I'm going to look at seniority level. It's like VP level or higher. Now, I'll just start there, right? There's like 9,500 results. And I could try to reach out to each of these individually. I could scrape this list and pull an email against them and then just start reaching out, right? But why would I do that if I can maybe be like, look at personal and being like school, they went to say NYU or something. All of a sudden it'll go from like 9.5, it's 49 results, right? So I don't need to get all 9,500, but if I can reach out to these 49 and give myself like a chance of 0.01% response to like 2 to 3% response, I get 1 or 2 of these people to talk to me, I'm good to go. And then I'll just try to find another association, right? So I would try to do stuff like this that aren't necessarily scalable, but at least like gives you the initial insights that you really need to then figure out where should you scale your efforts. you know. So that's an example. The other thing too is like, as you're reaching out, it's also good to just like look at what are they doing, and you can see all their activities. Like what matters to them, right? And this person doesn't really post and post a lot or engage a lot, but if you find somebody that does, like just posted an hour ago or like yesterday about something, it's a good thing to kind of like follow up on, especially if it's like talking about your topic. You can also search for posts, right? So you can search keywords in here and then find who's engaging and find prospects that way with like certain topics that you're solving for, right? Like I'll just show you another example. But like if I'm looking for, I don't know, I just wrote customer success sucks, right? So but I can look up posts, and then I can go down, and these people you can see these people. So this isn't the perfect example, but you kind of get what I'm saying. Is like you can scroll through these, and then whoever's engaging with this stuff, they're probably involved in it, and in that space that you're trying to target. And this is a good way to also delineate a list. And these aren't always like scalable things in the very beginning, but there are ways to scale them up. Like there's virtual assistants and I think like AI agents now that actually have their own LinkedIn profiles. So it's not like hard to do. Like we have done this before. We'll have like 10 or 12 profiles that just non-existent people doing this exercise. And that's a way to scale it up at a reasonable cost. So anyways, hopefully that's helpful. Just get creative. And like, again, if your like dinner is contingent upon you selling, you'll figure out a way. Yeah, cool.